Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. And today I have three topics I want to talk about. First, the Mac Pro is discontinued. Not really a surprise, but definitely a notable thing in the Mac history. I also have some benchmarks of the MacBook Neo I wanted to walk through, and Apple announced their WWDC dates. They're exactly when you would have expected them to be if you've followed the company for a long time. But they're official now, and I wanted to share a couple things that I hope to see from Apple at this event this June. So, starting with the Mac Pro discontinuation. In a press release, Apple just said, or even in an announcement to 9to5Mac, that, the Mac Pro is dead and then there's no plans to offer a future Mac Pro, which makes sense. If you've been paying attention at all, you would definitely recognize that Apple doesn't seem to have any interest in updating this computer. They updated the Mac Studio a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I forget now. But they updated that with the M3 Ultra and M4 Max chips. So the fastest Mac you could buy was the Studio, and it was faster than the Mac Pro, and they never updated the Mac Pro with those chips. As of today, we now have the M5 generation of chips is starting to roll out, and the M6 is most likely coming at the end of this year, and there was no indication that Apple was even going to catch up with the Studio specs for the Mac Pro, so I don't know. They just didn't care about it, didn't sell well enough, I guess, and I'm not totally surprised by that. It seemed like over the years, Apple really started to just cut down the niche of who this product was relevant for, to the point where it's really just people who literally must have PCIe slots and are willing to spend an enormous amount of money to do that. Which are people. I know there are definitely people who want that, but yeah, it's pretty slim compared to what it was previously. Like, I pulled up some press releases here, and in 2006, this is when the original Mac Pro was announced, and like this computer was so cool because it could be. This was back in like the days when you could dual boot between Windows and Mac OS, and so there were people who would buy these computers, and they were expensive gaming computers, but they were Apple people, so they're used to spending more money. And they would use Mac OS as like their productivity OS. And then when they wanted to play a game, they'd switch over to Windows. They'd just boot into Windows and they'd play their games, and they'd have, mainstream graphics cards in there, and they could swap them out. I'm pretty sure you could do some level of upgrades to other parts of the components. And that was cool. That was great. And then over the years, things started to disappear. Those use cases started to fade away to the point where with the M2 version of the Mac Pro, you couldn't even do like hardware upgrades. Like you couldn't upgrade the RAM anymore. You couldn't do any of this stuff. And like it was just really a shell of its former self. But another thing I wanted to call out here is this is 2006, so 20 years ago. How much this works out to today in today's money is different, but in terms of pricing, this started at $2,500, $2,499 to get the baseline. A lot of people would obviously upgrade and get more, but $2,500 for the absolute best Mac Apple made, with upgrades available. But that's attainable. It's very expensive, but even for the time, like Macs used to cost MacBook Pros cost a similar amount to what they do now. You could definitely spend an enormous amount on a MacBook Pro back then. You could easily spend this on a MacBook Pro, and you could buy a Mac Pro for that amount as well. We jump forward 7 years to the trash can Mac in 2013. The price here, $29.99 starting. So $500 more, but we all know this didn't really work out at all. They effectively released this and never made any meaningful changes to it. So it kind of just hung out. And then eventually, in 2019, at the bottom of this press release, so it doesn't even mention it in the title, but if you go all the way down to the bottom, you do see there is the new Mac Pro. This is the design we're used to today. And what's the price for this thing? $6,000 starting. $6,000, and I believe when you spec'd it up, you could get it up to like $30,000. So the price of a very good car is what this thing could drive you. And that's crazy. That puts it well outside the realm of possibility for almost anyone, basically any consumer. And even for businesses, we're at the point of just truly absurd numbers here. When Apple eventually updated it to Apple Silicon, I think the price stayed exactly the same for the starting price. And again, you weren't getting more performance than you were with a Mac Studio, which was significantly less money. So yeah, this product really didn't make sense in the Apple Silicon generation. It barely made sense here because of the restrictions Apple put on it. But yeah, now it's gone, and it is a bummer to see a 20-year history end, but at the same time, I just don't think there's a place for Apple's computers in 2026 for this form factor. They just don't make a computer that remotely makes sense here, right? Maybe if they were doing something with dedicated GPUs, or if they were doing something more with PCIe slots, but it seems like Apple just has no interest in those things. So I think, yeah, Thunderbolt is the future now. It's just we don't do it in a trash can. We do it in a Mac Studio. So that's the first thing. Second thing, let's take a look at some MacBook Neo benchmarks. I did some benchmarks to just see how the computer performed. I made a point in my review of the MacBook Neo that I wrote on my blog as well, that I did not want to include benchmarks because I did not think benchmarks were telling you an interesting story or a useful story with what I was trying to tell. I wasn't trying to give you just a spec readout. I was trying to explain what life was like with the laptop. And that said, I did do some benchmarks because I'm a nerd and I like benchmarks. So I also have an M2 Mac Mini around, which I thought was interesting because I did mention in my review that if you can find an M2 MacBook Air for the same price as the Neo, maybe you'd want to get that because it's going to have a nicer build. It's going to have a lot of improvements with the screen, the keyboard, the trackpad, the I/O, all that. And it would probably be about similar performance, maybe a little better. So it was interesting to see that. Basically, in terms of disk read and write speed, in terms of read, the Neo is way behind what I currently have with an M4 Pro, MacBook Pro, and it's less than half of the performance of a Mac Mini with an M2. In terms of disk write speed, the MacBook Pro leaves them all in the dust, of course, but the Neo is at least closer to the M2 in this case. Now, I will say for the vast majority of use cases, I don't think this is going to make a big difference. I do think that we stress over disk speed for a lot of things that don't really matter. In some use cases, sure. But unless you're moving enormous files around, and if the bottleneck is not the cable that you're using or the wireless network you're using, like it takes quite a bit to saturate your actual disk's read and write speeds. But if you have a use case, then yeah, the more modern Macs are going to be much quicker there, of course. Then we move on to Geekbench CPU single core. This is the chart that got everybody hyped that the Neo was basically just as fast as a MacBook Pro, which was an interesting thing to be happening online. But basically, this is effectively every computer and phone that I have in my house that I compared. And I think the interesting things I would call out here are that the Neo does indeed bench very close to the M4 Pro. I did not have an M5 to test here, so apologies for that. And it does bench significantly faster than the M2 in the Mac Mini. Also notable here is the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which is really identical with the iPhone 17 Pro. Notable. We also did multi-core, and of course, this is where the MacBook Pro with its many more cores really pulls ahead. The M4 Pro that I have is a 14-core CPU with 10 performance and 4 efficiency cores. So it pulls way ahead, leaves everyone else in the dust. But then you can see, in this case, the Mac Mini with an M2 pulls ahead of the Neo. The Neo has 4 cores. The Mini that I have has 6 cores. And so, yeah, there's the difference. You also will notice in the phones, the Galaxy S25 Ultra leaves everyone in the dust. So, yeah, Snapdragon, the Qualcomm chips have definitely improved their performance from a couple years ago when Apple was smoking everybody in these metrics. Let's move on to audio conversion. So this is a nice single core task. When you're using something like iStat menus to monitor CPU usage, when you do this, I'm using the app Fission by Rogue Amoeba. And basically this will take an audio file and convert it into another file format. I converted it to an MP3. And so this was converting a 90-minute podcast episode on my M4 Pro, 29 seconds, on my MacBook Neo, 35 seconds, on the Mac Mini with an M2, 42 seconds. So the Neo was quicker than the Mini there, and it was, 6 seconds. What's the difference there? Effectively nothing. So if it is genuinely a single core task, the Neo can definitely do quite well. Then I used my own app, Quick Subtitles, to transcribe some audio files. So actually that same podcast that I just turned into an MP3 file, I ran it through all of these and figured out how many words per second it was able to transcribe. And in this case, things are all pretty close. The M2 Mini is the slowest, the M4 Pro is the fastest. Tell me if you've heard that one before. And the Neo is kind of right there in the middle. So doing pretty well. This is an interesting task because it isn't just like hammering the CPU or the GPU. It's a combination of mostly CPU and the neural engine and a little bit of GPU, but it's really, I think the neural engine is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, and the newer generation neural engine is pushing it closer to the latest iPhone, which is a decent amount ahead of the Mac Mini with the M2. Then I built an app, so in Xcode. So I went from when I hit run, I did a clean build, hit run, and then built it as quick as it could. MacBook Pro in 12 seconds, MacBook Neo in 21 seconds, so a little less than double the time. The Mac Mini did it in 16 seconds, so splitting the difference. Exported video. So this was a DaVinci Resolve project. This was actually last week's podcast episode, so I exported that video. The Neo was the slowest here. This one took 19 and a half minutes compared to 11 minutes on the M4 Pro and 15 and a half minutes on the M2. So again, this is one of those situations where even with the same amount of RAM, I should say that M2 Mac Mini I have has 8 gigabytes of RAM as well. So any RAM limits are going to be the same across both those devices. But in that case, the Mini was able to do it notably quicker than the Neo. And what does this all mean? I don't know. It means whatever you want it to mean. But I hope this kind of gives you an idea for kind of where the Neo sits, which is it's not a bad computer by any means. I enjoy using this computer. And if you're doing individual tasks, and I should also say, one of the things that kind of gets me about these sorts of benchmarks is to make these benchmarks fair. When I did each of these tests, I stopped everything else on the computer. I just did this one task, and it went as fast as it could. And that's good for being as scientific as possible for the potential of these devices. But I think what separates them from, like, in terms of an experience is on a computer with 16 gigabytes of RAM, even an M1 processor, I wouldn't feel bad about exporting a video and then going to browse the web, having Slack open, having my RSS reader open, having my email app open. Like, you can just do these things and you can keep working. With the Neo, my computer is basically unusable for other things while it's exporting because it's sucking up all the RAM, all the CPU cycles. It's all being pushed towards this one task. And so again, if I leave my computer alone, it can do all right. But the experience during those 19 minutes when it's exporting, I really can't do much else on the Neo. Whereas on my M4 MacBook Pro, I hit export and I just go off and do other things. I don't even think about it. I just get a notification at some point. So obviously my MacBook Pro is a lot more expensive, but I've been using an base M1 device for the past 5 years at work, and I've been doing video editing, coding and stuff. And the Neo gets pushed harder. But if you want to see the raw performance, this is what it has. Now, let's close out with WWDC. And I don't have any super big requests for this year. As a developer who's built a couple apps on top of Apple's foundation model, so I think about my app Quick Notes, I think about Quick Subtitles. These are built on the tech that Apple introduced last year, specifically their speech analyzer and their foundation models, which they made available to developers. And so both of those apps use the speech analyzer to convert audio into text, right? They just transcribe audio into text. And I think it works really great. It's really performant. It's really quite accurate. But I would love to see them give a version 2 of that. I'd love to see them do a better version of that because there are other models out there. I'm using NVIDIA's Parakeet model on Quick Subtitles right now as an alternate option if you'd like to use that. That model is faster at transcribing than Apple's, and it's more accurate in my testing. So that's a better model that's faster than Apple's. Okay, that's not great. I'd love to see Apple kind of catch up and improve there, either in speed accuracy or ideally both. And then in terms of, and that's honestly it. That's really it. Everything else is great with it. I'm very happy with that API. So we'd just love to see the performance and the accuracy increase. The second thing I'd like to see as a developer is the foundation model. So the foundation model, I don't use in Quick Subtitles at all. I do use it in Quick Notes to clean up your text. And so basically there's a cleanup feature that you can run in Quick Notes where basically you'll record your note, you'll hit stop, then I transcribe the audio with the speech analyzer. But because there are errors, as we just mentioned, I have a cleanup feature you can opt into where I will automatically run that transcript through Apple's foundation model on device, and it will clean up any obvious transcription errors. So it does a pretty good job, but the limitation there is the context window, because the context window for this model is very small. It's about 4,000 tokens, I believe, and it's simply not enough. For example, the 15-minute episodes that I tend to record for this podcast, in terms of tokens for like passing that transcription into a model, those transcriptions end up being like 27 to 30,000 tokens. So there's absolutely nothing I can do with a transcript of this sort of podcast. So I've needed to rely on third-party models. So that's why in Quick Subtitles, if you want to use the AI analysis feature or the cleanup feature that I have there, those tend to be large files from podcasts and YouTube videos that simply do not fit in Apple's context window. So I have to use Gemini for that, or OpenAI if you bring your own key. And yeah, that's kind of frustrating. For Quick Notes, what that's meant is my brainstorm mode, which is kind of a mode you can go into to kind of just talk for a longer period of time into your phone, and then it'll turn it into something for you, a long form piece, a slide deck outline, a what's my point thing, just kind of like, what's the actual point I'm trying to make here? That I've had to use Gemini as well. That's the reason it's a paid feature, actually, is because I have to use Gemini for that, because Apple's model can't do it if you talk for more than a couple minutes at a time, and people are talking for a considerable amount more than that into this feature. So yeah, I would love to be able to bring some of this processing on device to just make it easier for people, make it cheaper for me, right? I would prefer to always use the on-device model when possible. A lot of the things that I'm doing with text processing is done totally fine with the on-device model. It's just a matter of I can't pass it too much text. And if I do that, it just literally airs out. I don't give a good user experience, so that's not great. So those are the things as a developer I'd want. As a user, I hope they figure out something good to do with Liquid Glass. I think it is not an improvement over what they had before. I also think they shouldn't go back. They can't go back. I think they need to figure out how to clean this up and make it feel better. I would really love to see basically, I'd like to make it so that when we see our first kind of moments of OS 27 across their devices, we breathe a sigh of relief and we're like, oh, okay, they cleaned it up. They made it better. And so I don't know what that's going to look like exactly, but that's why they have very well-paid designers, right? Hopefully they can fix it. So yeah, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.